Hey guys, how are you doing? It's Francis Hunt, and I'm delighted to actually introduce to you Jayant Bandari. Jayant is currently in Singapore. He has great knowledge on the direction he sees both Singapore, India will be taking. He writes, he consults to institutions. He has experience in the resources sector. He's worked with Doug Casey and other great entrepreneurs and anarcho capitalists, if we may use the phrase. Jayant, thank you for coming on. Delighted to have you.
Francis, thanks very much for having me on.
So there's some really interesting insights that I'm excited to pick your brain on. We have had a view that the larger Western society, on account of wokeness, is essentially going the Ayn Rand at the shrugged model, where they're going to invert, pervert, and break and corrupt the system. And the question is, as people that are seeking positioning for wealth building and wealth protection, where's the flow of money going globally? And it's always been, we listen to Kissinger, not because we like him, but because he pulls strings, it's flowing east. And then we have to ask where. And we've come to two key hotspots. We see the Middle East getting more sanitized, trying to put forward, although with its usual flair for corruption, an acceptable Western face. And then we see Singapore as the landing spot for financial, technological listings, etc., for the larger East, with the decline of Hong Kong, which we continue to see dissipate. Tell us why are you so optimistic, Singapore, if you are?
Well, so Francis, over the last couple of years, rental and property prices in Singapore have gone up by about 50% or so. And I'm currently in Singapore. A lot of Chinese are moving here. A lot of Western people want to move to Singapore. And Singaporean government is making it increasingly difficult for people to move to Singapore. And the reason is that Singapore continues to be an extremely stable place, culturally a very stable place, politically a very stable place. And these are the people who continue to carry forward some of the Western values that Western people have decided to let go of. For example, poor people here don't stand on the street asking for alms. I have been to houses of poor people with some charity people, and the poor people hide behind the walls because they don't want to be seen as accepting alms from other people. On the other hand, there's a class of Western people which actually not only takes alms in welfare, it fights for it, and it has the so-called moral courage to come on the street and ask for more and more welfare. So what I see in East Asia in general is a pride in not asking for free stuff from other people. And that is why I think there is a huge amount of stability in East Asia, including in China, Taiwan, South Korea, Japan, and even in Hong Kong. Although there is an emigration of wealth from Hong Kong to other places for obvious reasons, but even Hong Kong will stay a very good place over the long term.
It's an ethic, it's an ethos, isn't it? It's a dignity, a seeking of pride that just seems to be ebbing. And let's talk about the decline of the West, because you've covered this quite a lot. You've also done some amazing YouTubes. People should visit your channel, by the way. That's under Jayant Bandari, Jayant, and then Bhandari. Go check him out on YouTube. You've done a lot of interesting YouTubes on the concept of this affirmative action and the culture across different societies, and why this, what you're just mentioning, makes it a sweet spot. Let's talk about why the others decline a bit.
I think Western society, for whatever reason, has become very soft on people who whine, who have this victimhood mentality. And now the problem is that even the smallest of publicly listed companies has to have a woman on the board. It has to have colored people in the management, that is copying what happened in South Africa. And South Africa has been on fast forward to complete demise, in my view. And that's what's been happening in the Western society, because we have given up in the West this strong attachment to Western values, values that East Asia actually copied. But in the West, we have given up on those values. And the end result is that our institutions in the West are coming unhinged. They are falling apart. They don't provide you justice anymore. They don't provide you meritocratic conduct anymore. So slowly and surely, Western society is in decline because we have chosen wrong values and we have given up on the Western values that we had until recently.
I love that, and I agree with that. I think it's orchestrated. We won't go too far down that rabbit hole. In other words, most people would prefer to continue as we always have, meritocracy over other things. However, the toxicity is coming in right at the top in the media and everything, and as a result, it seems like I'm an intended managed decline for me. But on that point, one of the reasons I had something interesting that I've shared a couple of, I'll pop it up to you as well, because I'm as someone who understands the financial system well, you'll enjoy this. I did a market cap valuation per citizen on the USA, 40 trillion, that's 40,000, that's in billions, market cap of all US stock markets, and 336 million population. It's a very rudimentary measure. There's $120,000 being held up of market cap by each American. In short, America holds a premium. If you take a look at some of those other nations you've mentioned, South Africa is $12,000. You look at Japan, that's declining, it's at $40,000. And you look at developing countries like Brazil and Russia, you've got 3 and 2,300, India sub 2,000, and the overall BRICS total at about 4,000. Per population. Now, obviously, there's a lot of population. Just giving birth to a large population doesn't mean there's immense talent. So it's a very rudimentary measure. But one of the reasons I've always felt that America got to justify this greater market cap was the hub of technology, rule of law, and private property rights, and a meritocracy, and a true capitalism of price discovery mechanisms. And what I'm finding in terms of what you just mentioned is that premium is not yet dissipating, but all those individual things are now actively being undermined in terms of price discovery, the wokeness. It's no longer about the best person for the job. It's we need a female, or we need a person of color, or we need an X, Y, and Z. And now we get, the watermelon communism is actually being pushed harder, it seems to me, in Europe and America rather than in China. So my suspicion is that 120 goes down and we see it reemerge in other places like Singapore and the Middle East. And sometimes positioning is everything when you can see the macro moves. Would you agree? Do you have something you would add to that? Is America actually being sustained on far too high a premium in terms of its trajectory? Remembering that markets are actually a forward discounting mechanism for trend and direction. Have we not had peak America and this has declined?
Well, so Francis, America continues to be, in my view, among the very best countries on the planet. It is a country where you find freedom, where actually people are very helpful to you. People want other people to do well. It's a great society. But the trend is against America because we have in America chosen wrong values for the future. Now, I spent a lot of time in San Francisco, and over the last few months, about, let's say 15% of IT workers have been laid off. There's a huge amount of gloominess in San Francisco area as a result of that. And people have become habituated of easy life. People have become habituated of welfare in San Francisco area and the Western society in general. So clearly the Western society, particularly America, despite that it is the best place on the planet even today, but it is past its peak already. And going forward, the best places to live and at least to keep your money is going to be what I think East Asia, because East Asia is improving virtually everywhere. Hong Kong is facing a bit of an issue right now, but China will continue to grow. South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, Singapore, they are extremely good economies, and they focus on creating work. They are focused on being productive. If you see how a Singaporean worker works, you would be, those people who haven't been to Singapore would be amazed to see the speed at which they work. They produce easily twice as much as what a Western person does today. And easily they do probably about 10 times more than what a person from the third world does.
Yeah, I've got a funny anecdote to that just for a laugh. I remember going to Singapore and I was part of mine to buy a handy cam, and I went in and I expressed my interest, and the salesman was brilliant and relentless. I walked out with a handy cam, 5 different lenses, a tripod, a luxury in bag. I mean, he just didn't give up. And I just respected the work ethic for everything. And I walked out like Santa Claus with all my stuff. And it wasn't a uniqueness, they hustle, they properly hustle. And they were relentless and they had their charm about it as well. I love the folksiness of America. And when we talk about America, this is why I say that our interactions with the general populace, unfortunately, the toxicity of wokeness that we're seeing that's coming in through the companies like Gillette, this is a top-down thing through many other things, and it's poisoning a beautiful well, unfortunately, and it's a tragedy to observe. So there's no glee in that, and I still love visiting it. I'm hoping I think they're just about due removing their mandation of non-Americans having injectables, but I'll be back in to visit in no time. So the winners, Singapore. Talk to us a little bit about India, because whilst India shows up on the numbers very low, it has a massive population in terms of its market cap. Why will India not have a major tech leader that will be listed in Mumbai? Why are you a bit of a bear on India? We understand there's corruption. Sometimes we more hard. I mean, I'm a South African. If I talk with other South Africans, everything's going to hell in a handbag. We used to export electricity. Now we can't even keep the mines running. But it's easy sometimes to be a little bit overly critical, self-critical as an Indian national on the things that go wrong. Give us your take there.
So Francis, remember, I'm a financial analyst. I have to be very measured about what I say. When you said that I'm a bit of a bear on India, that is not correct, because I am a total bear on India. India is headed towards a disaster. And my words are well-measured words. I'm not exaggerating it. I'm not being overly self-critical. I am speaking the facts as I have seen and experienced in the country. The problem with India is that it's an extremely corrupt and venal place. I have never in my life met a public servant who does not ask for a bribe. And so bad is the situation that you not only have to pay bribe at every moment, you also have to beg in front of them, because they get money anyway. They want you to prostrate in front of them. And I'm saying that literally. People literally prostrate in front of the bureaucrats.
So it's not even a business. It's not even a business thing, oil the wheels. It's almost like, I need you to grovel. There's a meanness to it.
Absolutely. There are sadistic people who suffer from a huge inferiority complex. And this is across the board. There's no exception in that country. That's true with the politicians. That's true with the bureaucrats. And they make the citizens suffer. And the citizens don't fight back against the rulers and politicians. The only thing, and the Indians are known for sheepishness. They don't ever fight back. India has no history of fighting against anyone. The whole independence movement is a myth. None of those things happened. It was only the the people who went to the UK from India returned back and they realized that British weren't going to shoot them at sight, so they were trying to grab power in that country. And that has continued over the last 75 years. So this is the issue institutionally with the country. The second problem is that the institutions of India have continued to worsen over the last 77 years. If there were even a slight improvement in institutions over the last 75 years, I would have kept my mouth shut. But what I see is that institutions are falling apart very rapidly. And the problem is that Indians are extremely materialistic people. They don't fight for what is moral. They live on the basis of expediency. As long as they are making money and as long as they think their life will improve or they will have security, they don't care about anything. And because there is no civic sense among Indians, it is headed for a disaster because all these institutions will fall apart. There's nothing to keep the society together. India is a product of British colonization. India as a country did not exist when the British arrived in India. They put that country together, and without the British as acting as a glue, that country will simply fall apart. It is regressing to its tribal past, as South Africa is, as virtually every third country has been over the last 78 years.
So it seems very deep-rooted cultural, and it sounds like it's a homologation of a lot of almost tribal aspects. And of course, there's the caste system. You mentioned also in your affirmative action that there's this inversion. So people that may have had lower education are now automatically being promoted and hired as well. So that the worst part of the population are in the service frontage as well, in essence. So you have this inversion.
Yes, and so not only because of diversity and affirmative policy, we have a lot more people from the lower caste in the government than there should have been, were it a meritocratic institution. But these people are not only, they are not competent enough, they are actually very sadistic as well, because once they get into position of power, because they know within themselves that they got there without having competencies, the only thing they have is to show off their power to other people. And they are especially sadistic towards people of their own kind. So we are not really removing the caste system by putting too many people from the lower caste into positions of power, because they are encouraging, because of the way the psychology of these people works, it is actually worsening the caste system. And moreover, Francis, most of the caste-related problem that you hear about in the media is mentioned in passive voice. And the reason is that they don't want to say that most of the caste-related problem is actually between two lower caste people. So if one lower caste community gets beaten up, they want to only mention that this community got beaten up, this lower caste community. They want to ignore saying that it was actually just another lower caste community that was fighting for who is superior among the two of them. So this caste system is not just a linear system, it's very much in the psyche of Indians. And that is true not just with people who believe in the caste system, that permeates throughout the thinking of Indian society.
Right. It does also sound like South Africa and black-on-black violence here. They'll often just say these people were attacked and they leave it hanging, and it's not identified that it's again a tribal type concept. That's disappointing. It is a bit disappointing to hear, because there are incredibly talented people of Indian. I mean, I was in the programming world. They were the top guns. They were brilliant. I mean, the South African Indians that I came into contact with. So let's talk about maybe immigrant Indians and how they integrate, because I've always found them non-violent, generally hardworking, and very good STEM brains amongst them. I was already in a STEM environment, so maybe that's a good sample. But nonetheless, and good businessmen in Southern Africa. They would run, they'd work, they would, there won't be. But maybe that was also a white man's experience, a European man's experience. Maybe they would have treated me differently had I been another Indian, which is something of what you might be suggesting. Why do we as Westerners have, I'm assuming others have my view, generally it is my expectation. Is that a bit of a narrow Overton window to be explained?
Well, when you say Indians are non-violent, which is actually very true, Indians are also very sheepish, and I take that as a criticism of the Indian culture. If you don't fight for what is right, you can never build a civilization, and you can never maintain a civilization. There has to be people. There has to be a critical mass of people who can risk their life and their positions and their financial status to keep a society at a place where it stays a civilization. So Indians cannot become the spinal cord of a civilization as a result of that. Now, it is indeed true that in Africa, across the board, a lot of Indians are good businessmen. And these were among the smartest people that left the country for Africa during the British times. And then many of those left for the UK. So these are non-violent, peaceful people, which I don't always like, because you still need to have a moral fabric within yourself. It is perfectly fine to be businessmen, but you should also have a moral fabric within yourself. You should have this instinct for righteous indignation. When something is not going right, you should be able to stand up and say, hey, this is not right. And you should be able to say, even if you lose your financial situation or your position. So Indians don't fight for it. As a result, India as a society stays a slavish society. It was a slave of all the rulers that have ever existed in that country. It was by chance that Europeans turned out to be relatively decent, who treated these people better, despite that Indians had all the signs of sheepishness. So now you have relatively good people in Africa and in the UK. These were the very best people of India. And remember, 1 out of every 6 or every 5 person on the planet is an Indian. So if you have a few 100,000 or a few million good Indians who left India, they don't necessarily represent the average of what the situation in India is.
I've often said the immigrants of a nation are their best citizens. I mean, wherever you go. Not always, but I mean, the economic variety. You're quite right. Obviously, we have the refugees and the asylum seekers going into London, UK and all of that. I'm talking of the week. I mean, just as a working group, South Africans that have gone to the UK to work, I'm typically talking about the white European ones. They were popular and they're considered to work hard. They're known to contribute most and take the least out of the welfare state. So they just don't go there to let. But I also was thinking of the Indians, of all the CEOs in Microsoft and all of them. The cream of the Indian crop is flourishing in the places like America, where you have a meritocracy. So I wonder, is it not just the environment? Because people take on the environment they are in. And those people needed to leave an environment they couldn't fix to go to one which was better. And now they flourish and become quite stalwarts. Because when you talk about docileness, maybe, I feel in terms of the event of March 2020, that, about my own people, that there's been insufficient pushback and they've been docile and they're slowly watching enslavement. Is this not, we just haven't pushed back enough. We've got this woke toxicity that is clearly being rolled out, and it's crushing essentially white European nations, both in Europe, Canada, America, and of course Australia and New Zealand. Talk about the Commonwealth in sense. And they are sitting and they're eating it. They're eating it up. And there's no manic street preacher. If you want to define me, I'm this yelling on the street corner manic street preacher, which probably won't get scaled up enough on YouTube for exactly that. But where's the warrior spirit amongst them? So maybe it's just we see this as activists. We see inertia around us generally, or still within this, you think India is lower than other nations in that respect?
Well, so you might want to go to Twitter and search for Hunger Games and with my name, and you will come across probably 100 videos of police beating up people during the March 2020 event days. The police was given free hand to beat up anyone, a pregnant women going to the hospital, old people going to the hospital. The brutality, and I was stuck in India those days, the brutality was everywhere in the country. And this is a country with non-stop brutalities. There was this demonetization in which the Prime Minister Modi forced old people, old women, sick people to queue up outside banks to convert only about $20 or $30 worth of their banknotes at one point of time. So they had to keep lining up again and again. The kind of brutalities and beatings Indians accept is nowhere what I have seen elsewhere in the world. Blacks fight back eventually, Europeans fight back eventually, and East Asians fight back eventually. India is known to be a non-violent country, and I usually take that as a criticism because they never fight back. There is the gene of righteous indignation. The moral fabric simply isn't in that country. And because of that, there is no spine to keep that society together or to make it move forward as a single society.
So all Indian governments and police structures are entirely draconian and will likely remain so, and they'll enforce with disregard and inconvenience on the elderly and the disabled any measure that they decide is expedient with very little sympathy. And that's likely to remain the case.
So, Francis, let me tell you my own experience. You go to a police station or anywhere in a government office, you see abuses happening. I witnessed abuse of a child, a male child, by the police, and I reported that to the top police officer of the central province of Madhya Pradesh, and I commission as well. Nothing ever happens, and I've witnessed it with my own eyes. So these things are rampant. They happen everywhere. And 1 out of 1,000 cases get recorded, or I would say 1 out of 10,000 of such abuses get recorded. And you can still see literally thousands of videos of abuses being done by the police and the people in authority in that country. So it is just everywhere in the country. Totalitarian is everywhere. There's something called encounter killing, which is a very unusual Indian terminology in which the police decides to kill someone and then claim that they had a gun fight with this person they killed. And they often kill random people. They often kill people who are completely innocent, or often kill people who just don't like the police or who have gone against the police or politicians. Now remember, even Stalin and Mao did not kill people this way. They documented who they killed. Stalin and Hitler always signed the papers before they authorized killings. Indian police kills with impunity, and the court will never do anything about it.
Wow. That's a shocking indictment. So, you get the impression that it's always put to you, the American police, particularly, the classic stigma of, brutal white cop in ethnic minorities areas. It just doesn't, I've never felt that it holds up. The stats don't support it, but you get the impression that India lead the ranks on police brutality, in essence, from what you're saying.
Well, American police is saint in comparison to what happens in India. Now, your best bet is to talk to a taxi driver, a colored taxi driver in the US, And if he is a new immigrant, he will tell you stories of how good the police in the US is. And I'm completely with you, Francis, that the American police is not necessarily what I expect from a Western police, but it is saintly compared to what happens in India. In India, every policeman is an abuser, is a predator. And remember, a very interesting thing, Indian police carries a stick in their hands. They are not provided guns, and if at all they have rifles, they have World War I and World War II rifles that actually don't work because they are so completely untrained, and the fact that they are so completely emotional that they cannot be given proper guns.
Wow. Well, that's an eye opener for me. I haven't traveled per se to India, so I haven't got the privilege of personal account. But that's an eye opener, and it's a small disappointment, I have to say, for as I say, people that I've met, I've always had great interactions with. But as you say, maybe it's a sample, or maybe it's a culture that of docility that's allowed such draconian. Are we all not being Indianified though? Let's leave the poor Indians that have taken their back. Slowly but surely, is this not actually a totalitarianism? Because if I talk about white Europeans, which I'm entitled to, we've been molded into docile acceptances of reductions of freedom. I mean, in the UK, they've gone for these 15-minute cities now. They're basically preempting how they're going to restrain your freedom of movement. This is totalitarianism. The CBDCs are guaranteed to be coming out. We're waiting for the crisis that they'll bring for it. We're all just trying to guess the meme. Where the heads on sticks. I mean, from the sons of Vikings and Danes and all of these Celtic warrior nations. What's happened to? I mean, aren't we all going to go to that lowest common denominator? So if we concede that maybe the Indian populace is there already, are we not fast-tracking ourselves there, the rest of the world?
Well, the Western society will very likely never reach the horrible status of the cockroach kind of life that most Indians live under. But it is indeed true that because Western people have reduced their fighting for what is right, their institutions have been falling apart. Most people in the Western society do no longer stand up for what is right. They are afraid of losing their jobs. They don't want to complain. They don't want to openly talk about let's say, the diversity against the affirmative action, because they think that they would be seen negatively by their friends and families and they might lose their jobs. And unfortunately, we have come to a position where despite that a lot of people really understand what is happening, they are no longer happy with risking the comforts that Western society provides them. Sometimes you have to risk your financial status and positions if you want your society to survive as a civilization. And yes, as a result, Western society is falling apart. Certainly the institutions are falling apart.
Agreed. And I mean, freedom, it's only freedom if it's got to be regularly earned with blood, is the saying, hasn't it? Spilt blood. So the Middle East, what's your take? I love this from the wealth perspective, capital flows. I mean, we're going to have a lot of people. Where do I go? Where do I invest? These are the questions I get most. So this is what's so useful about getting your take. And capital formation and business. I'm suspicious of the bone saw cutting bloke, but he's sanitized. He locked all the sheikhs up in the 5-star, and he's women are driving now. There's a fast track to modernization from what was a virtually medieval, barbaric monarchy, and now they spent 10 times. The Russians spent 18 billion on the World Cup. They spent 200 billion. They didn't do it just for that tournament. Now I'm seeing, they're moving football over there. There's going to be a World Cup fixture. They're wanting to become part of the cultural universe of Western things. Soccer is the big global sport. And they're building this edge, which is 300 meters long, strip through the desert, where they're going to do high density people. They're going to have this own, constitution, which will not be doesn't require Islamism or Islamic laws, etc., etc. All of this is moving. As I say, I don't trust the underworld. I think they looked after their labor. Sounds very similar to how you've described police brutality in India. But is this going to get some of the benefit of the Western seep? So we're talking about seepage out of Western wealth zones and hubs and money moving. Where does it land if we can get the flows right? Will it be a center? Do you have a view on the Dubai, Qatar? To me, as a regular traveler, just this is an anecdote, they're the best airlines. They still treat service as something to be aspired towards, while the Europeans have gone, very blasé. Turkish, Qatar, Emirates are the best three airlines to fly. I fly those if I can when I'm flying. So, what's your response on that? And that sort of, it's kind of an Islamic revolution as well.
Well, yeah, absolutely, Francis. A lot of people in the Western world have not been to the Middle East. I try to go to the Middle East as much as I can. And the media and the military industrial complex has created this overly negative image of Islam. And most of the conflict is between the wokeness of the West and Islam. Now, because people don't go much to the Middle East, they have an extreme image of what is happening in the Middle East. People should consider going to, and single women can go to Oman and Bahrain and UAE, and they can walk around in a lot of safety. These countries are very safe for women. They are very safe for men, and they want to attract foreign talent. United Arab Emirates actually actively brings in the best people from the world. Singapore does the same thing, and Hong Kong historically did the same thing. They want to bring best people into their countries, and they want them to become economic powerhouses. And contrary to a popular perception, in United Arab Emirates, you can actually build churches and temples, and the government provides you help with constructing temples and churches. So, people for sure have this negative image of the Middle East because of Iran and what they hear about in Iran and what happened in Iraq and Syria and some of the other places. But Middle East, I think, is improving. Some of the places will not improve anymore. Let's say Afghanistan or some parts of northern Africa like Libya, because unfortunately our woke rulers have destroyed the institutions that these countries had. Iraq was a secular country. Saddam Hussein was the best person Iraqis could have found. Our woke leaders killed Saddam Hussein, and now they have
and Gaddafi. Gaddafi had one of the most, he used the oil wealth. You get married, you got a house with, if you had a child, it was on the state. It was a very, very benign, a friendly place, and they destroyed it. And it's ironic that the most secular, most benevolent Islamic nations were the ones, and we did the petrodollar deal with the most aggressive version thereof. And that was all about energy policy and petrodollar and the implicit guarantee, and actually did so much damage to far nicer. And I would say Iran even is actually, a nice place to visit, full of stuff with nice people. I would say the threat they pose is greatly trumped up and puffed up by various axes of that. And it's ironic that it's okay for Israel to get nuclear power, but they cannot be allowed. So yes, having seen some of the slide in standards in Southern Africa in terms of government and everything, I do see this an accelerated microcosm of Western decline. So I almost feel I'm grateful to have lived in SA to see all of these things taking place. And I think they will have a slow motion version. I don't know if it'll go that fast, but we'll suddenly have quantum shapes where there will be a substantial drop in living standards, which will go with, I think, the pension systems and CBDC introduction. But so what would be your best advice for people in terms of investing, living? So we have the 5 flags, what nationality you should have, where you should bank, where you should invest, and all of that. Where's your master plan at, as far as you're comfortable to discuss at broad strokes, for living, existing, investing, and its citizenship as well?
Well, citizenship is something that, I would prefer to have citizenship of one of the developed countries. I want to live preferably in a country that I'm not a citizen of.
Correct.
And given the fact, Francis, that given the internet, we can make our capital extremely mobile. Everyone should be opening a lot of bank accounts across the world and moving his money around and invest in those countries. And that way you ensure yourself against the moodiness of the citizenship that you hold or the residency that you hold.
Yeah.
And ideally, you want to live in a jurisdiction, at least virtually, if not physically, where the government does not keeps tabs on what your net worth is. So you want to be a citizen, a resident of a country where the government does not ask you to pay taxes on your interest or dividends, because the problem is not the taxes on dividends and interest. The problem is that then the government knows everything that you own. So you really, really want to secure yourself in terms of what you can protect yourself in terms of your money, and all legally. There are legal ways to do all these things, but you should do these things to protect yourself, because the Western governments are short of cash. They will continue to increase taxes and they will continue to expropriate your money. People in the third world countries are in even worse problems because they don't have the rule of law that the Western civilization has historically had. So that is exactly why, Francis, you see a lot of people moving to, let's say, Dubai from India. I think about 40% of houses in Dubai are bought by Indians, because India provides an extremely unfair and tyrannical regime for people with money. So people want to leave these countries. So I think it's very important to broaden where you keep your money. And it is so easy to open bank accounts in many, many parts of the world. You keep a balance of $5, $7 in, let's say, in Beijing, and you have a bank account there. And you are then in a position to electronically move your money around in case you really need to.
Love that. I think you spoke a lot of great truths in that one. In fact, I'm keen to bring up a map of the Middle East because it's confusing to many people, particularly if you're in the States, where a lot of international geography might not have been covered to the same level. But also, I can't help but think that in this discussion, I want to mention, and I'll probably do a tail ender, the legitimate use of entities, foundations, corporations play a massive role in this as well, because then you have things that transcend your existence and timeline for estate management and a number of other things. And also the right to accumulate wealth without tax if you don't take a distribution. If we're looking at the Middle East, I'm hoping it's sharing now. When people talk about Dubai, what about Qatar? Because many people have said, well, it's the one that's the rich guy. Let me just make that bigger. Dubai is the name that often springs, but should you be in Qatar? Should you be UAE? What's the differences within? Do you have any experience with that you have a couple of comments to share? Because I don't.
Well, because Francis, it hasn't been easy to go to Qatar and Kuwait as a tourist. So I have been to UAE, Bahrain, Oman several times, but it wasn't easy. But from what I understand, it has become increasingly easy to go as a tourist to these countries, and I will eventually go there. Now, I think people have to accept that different people have different cultures, they have different social values. So, what you might not like visually in terms of what people wear, for example, is not something that should put you off in terms of going and visiting those countries. Uh, in Dubai, for example, in UAE, in Abu Dhabi, you can see women wearing, very little clothes to a lot of clothes. And there is an acceptability for all these kinds of people. And I think most people should learn to accept lives, how other people prefer to live. My problem is only when they like to dictate their views on me.
Yeah.
So, I think the Middle East is increasingly becoming better. Saudi Arabia is becoming better. Kuwait, Qatar are becoming better. Yes, I think Middle East is something people should start paying attention to. I do a lot of work in the mining space, and Saudi Arabia is now actually encouraging companies to come and invest in Saudi Arabia. Barrick and I think Anglo American recently did some transaction in Saudi Arabia. So they are inviting foreigners to come and explore for minerals in Saudi Arabia.
And it's massive piece of land out of all of them. I mean, it's the scale there, isn't it? It's not just maybe about oil. They maybe haven't done enough looking around. So those in the mining space could do exceedingly well in it. I mean, I like the warmth. I like the sun. It does get exceedingly hot in summer, though. I'd probably be a spring and autumn guy. But the interesting part of wokeness that's infuriating me is the extremism of the feminism, the transgenderism agenda to transhumanism that they seem to be pushing. And in the Middle East, you will not see that same promotion of those kind of, because of the base of Islamic culture to that degree. So that's something that's really winding you up. Every Emmy show has to be a transgender guy wearing a devil's suit gyrating to this Hollywood non-stop cookie cutter approach to choreography, entertainment, and inversion, perversion. You would escape that. Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely, yeah. So, and it's the same with East Asia as well. They don't. So there's a lot of, actually, at least in East Asia, people can do what they want to do in their bedrooms. The society does not like to let people sexualize children or promote confusion about sexuality on the street. So East Asian countries do allow pride parades to happen on their streets, and I think it's a perfectly legitimate thing to do. There is and women in East Asia, from what I see, find it humiliating to be told that they would rise up because of their genitals. And it should be embarrassing and humiliating. I don't want to be seen, Francis, as someone who got to where I got to because of the color of my skin. So these perversions, the gender thing, the race affirmative policies have stayed away from the Middle East and East Asia, and that is exactly the reasons why those societies are stable and will continue to improve over the next few years.
That's awesome. So it's still a meritocracy. In short, if you are of broadly conservative values, you like law and order, but not over-dominant police, you like family values and not the promotion of all the inversion, perversion aspects just mentioned, you could actually make have good living standards there, providing you're prepared to assimilate. And your wife in a jeans and t-shirt will be able to stroll down the street without being accosted and all these weird assumptions we sometimes have around Middle Eastern existence, where she might be stoned for being...
You are very safe. Women are very safe in most of those countries.
Excellent. Going back to Singapore, which we were putting forward, I want to put a little few things that were a concern. The government, during the events of March 2020, friends who were there saying they literally had 2 cubic meters of space on the beach with a towel, with people on the beach. They literally had to go with a mask into the water, various other things that were deeply draconian. So the trade-offs, government seems to have an iron fist, and they unpack it if they feel they have to, in terms of regs, rules, and compliance. What's your take?
Well, yeah, well, Francis, that's absolutely true. But that was the case with virtually every country you can think of, except for, I think, Japan. Japan never had. I think Japan never have a heavy-handed approach towards controls after March 2020. We had problems in Australia. We had huge problems in Canada. The US continues to restrict people based on whether they have it continues to have border restrictions. Now, Singapore does not have any border restrictions at all anymore. So, other countries are no not ha- there's no way to compare like to like, but a lot of countries haven't really done very well in this respect. India, of course, did tyrant in trying to control COVID, in trying to deal with March 2020. And Japan probably was among the best countries on the planet.
Yeah, I agree with Japan being, it's not in their nature as well. They just try to have some dignity with all of this. Yeah, and I respect them for that immensely. I just felt, so there's also the law, and then there's practically what happened on the ground. For example, in the States, people still visit friends in other states. There wasn't, you couldn't move around borders. They didn't have great restrictions on movement, and most people weren't wearing masks in cars and various other things. And it just felt that the reports I was getting from Europeans based in Singapore is that they were very, very managing, very efficiently and to an extreme degree, and tolerated no pushback in terms of non-compliance.
Okay, so Francis, East Asians prefer to follow what they are told to do.
Yeah.
So, it's important to remember that East Asia has copied a lot of ways and operational and lifestyle aspects of the Western society. It all started from, I think, Meiji Restoration that started in Japan. They copied Western values and Western ways of running their institutions and Western systems into their societies. And that has got permeated into East Asia. But unfortunately, it is extremely difficult to copy Western philosophy. It is extremely difficult to copy those foundational aspects of the Western society. So unfortunately, unless those things are copied, people don't have this awareness about liberty. So yes, unfortunately, East Asia lacks those foundations, but it is the way it is today.
Yeah. It's a small trade-off. I just don't want to be all rose-tinted glasses. That was the one criticism that came out. And the government is pretty firm and strong-willed. Some people will claim it's very clinical. Actually, for children and family and having a clean, safe environment, that's quite good. But I don't want to trade too much in terms of freedoms. I'm of the opinion, much like you, there's something to be taken from many places, and I wish to be a partial visitor to all without being a citizen. I think the worst place for most people is being born, bred, and passported in that home domestic country, and then you are greatly serfdom to your own country. Being a visitor to other people's countries is an almost escalated status or a higher status of treatment. And I've found pulling out different driver's licenses always to the different country has served me very well. With the police forces of America, South Africa, whenever I've been pulled over for being a bit rich on the throttle, I've usually been let off and sent on my way. And go where you're treated best. Be a guest in everybody's country and a citizen of none, and have a bank account in many of them, and contemplate property investments. Any final words, because we've taken a lot of your time and I've really enjoyed this discussion immensely. Any final words in terms of what you'd give to the audience, Jayant? How would you what's coming for us? What should they do? How should they prepare? And what thoughts should be at the prime of their mind? What's on your mind right now? And you're welcome to also bring in the resources sector, which we haven't had time to explore, but that you're an expert in as well.
Yeah. So Francis, not everyone can do what you and I have been able to do. But certainly people can open bank accounts in other countries. It's extremely easy to open bank accounts in many, many countries. And despite this propaganda that opening bank accounts has become very difficult, people should do this thing. And it should not consume too much of your time and financial resources to do so. When you go traveling to some country, see if you can open a bank account. I think it's also very easy for people to invest in other countries. And that's what people should try to do. They should not keep all their eggs in the same basket. Despite the fact, Francis, that I think there has been only one civilization, which has been Western civilization. It is past its peak and it's decaying. A lot of good values have been copied in East Asia, and some of the good values are being copied in the Middle East. So it's very important for people to pay attention to those two areas. And I think people should not fool themselves into thinking that the rest of the emerging markets will ever emerge. Latin American countries will continue to deteriorate very fast. The other third world countries will deteriorate very fast. And I think people should always also understand that, yes, America has always won, but what happened in the past will not necessarily continue to happen in the future. So it's important to remember that it's still the best country in my view, but its best days are all in
behind
the past now.
Yeah, absolutely. Jayant, that's been a really enjoyable conversation. People that would like to follow your very intriguing thoughts and your great experience, how should they engage? I think you have a Twitter profile. Is that not correct?
Yes, I have a Twitter profile, Jayant Bhandari 5, and my website is jayantbhandari.com.
Excellent. Thank you so much for your time. I've really enjoyed this and look forward to seeing you next time we meet up in our private group. But awesome to chat, and we could catch you on. Have a great week ahead.
Great. Thank you very much, Francis. Thanks for the opportunity.
Bye for now.